Right, 81333, precede your message with the word Leeds if you want to text us. We're thrilled to hear from you. Let's talk, first of all, to Carole Spiers from the Carole Spiers Group, who's a bit of a work stress expert. Carole, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Martin.
What's your view on what both of them have said? Sir Jimmy is saying these are broadcasting's great nights. Sir Jimmy is saying that society is getting ruder, and he sees some of the sort of more aggressive interviews on the TV as a symptom of that. Mm-hmm. And Sir Bruce is saying that society is getting more ageist. I mean, what do you feel about those two issues?
Well, I think that is society getting ruder? I think in many ways it is, and I think there are all sorts of reasons for that. I think that we're living very much more in a me culture in society. I think, as we heard from Bob, that respect seems to have gone out of the window. People don't necessarily take a pride in themselves, and they're not necessarily extending the courtesies, and the word respect we keep using, but it's the right word to use, towards people, whether they're alive or dead or whatever that is. And I think that the old-fashioned values of having that respect, having the courtesies, that as children you tried to instill those into children so that they would come thereafter and actually have those automatically, and they slipped off the tongue towards other people. I think they're not being brought into modern-day behaviour.
I mean, that's a sort of fairly wide generalisation there, Carole, because I mean, I've got 4 kids, and they all show respect for their grandparents and that sort of thing, and certainly wouldn't do anything like turning their back on a funeral procession, whether it's Mrs. Thatcher or anybody else. So, do you think that's true throughout society, or do you think there's just a sort of one sort of portion of society that behaves like that, with disrespect?
I think it's a portion. Sorry to interrupt you. I think it's a portion. You've got 4 children. I have 3 children. You bring them up in a certain way. There are certain values that you hold dear to yourself that you would actually pass on to your children. If those values are not instilled into a child in the early stages, they actually don't know whether they're needed. So you can't blame the child. We have to look at the parents as the role model for the future generation.
Yes, and when you look at, I mean, if we're talking about rudeness and lack of respect, I suppose it all spills over into this very loutish society. I mean, there was a survey last week saying people thought society was getting more loutish. And then at the weekend we saw, violence at the football match at Millwall, Wigan, and then again in the centre of Newcastle. And presumably it's alcohol, I would have thought, that fuels a lot of that.
I think alcohol has a huge amount to play. There's no question of that. But where you have to think of, why is alcohol needed? Are we drinking alcohol just because we want to have a good time, or we need it to actually release our inhibitions? So I think alcohol has a very big part to play. I think people, if they don't know those boundaries, will actually just let themselves go. And a football field is a good enough place as anywhere else. You've got the adrenaline, you've got the cortisol all coming into the body, and they just basically will just go for it. So I think they come back to those boundaries, and what's acceptable and unacceptable behaviour isn't necessarily being what's instilled into the youth of today. And I don't want to keep going back to old-fashioned values, but some of those are really worthwhile holding on to, because that's what you're trying to create. It is a respect. It is for where you are, knowing what the boundaries are. Do people fall back to the lowest common denominator? Yes, of course they do. We've seen it in the riots. We've seen it time and time again. Loutish behaviour brings about other loutish behaviour. I think I can get away with it, so therefore I do. So therefore it's really like, well, let's just try it. Let's test it and see what it's like. And I think that certain areas, as a football, gives that opportunity for people to say, I don't really care, I'm just going to go with it and try and stop me.
Yeah, can schools do anything? Because, the problem with education, to me, it's all sort of results driven now, and therefore teachers, have got to keep up with the national curriculum and all that. And obviously there's no corporal punishment or anything like that in schools, so the sanctions are less. They're really between a rock and a hard place, schools, aren't they? Because they have to get the results. It's results driven. It's very difficult for them to teach respect there, and often the damage is done, I suppose, by the time kids get to school.
I think the damage may have been done, but it doesn't necessarily mean that schools can't come up with what's acceptable and unacceptable behaviour. In a school, bullying behaviour should be unacceptable, but students and children think they can get away with it, and that bullying behaviour can go into the workplace, which is another subject unto its own. I think teachers play a very big part, because if children, unfortunately, and not necessarily getting the example from their parents as a role model to guide them through for the rest of their lives, then they need to have to learn it from somewhere. Yeah. So should the school curriculum actually build that into a part of their teaching process and the education process, then I would say absolutely it should.
OK, thanks for joining us, Carole. Carole Spiers there, who's the CEO of the Carole Spiers Group, who work in the area of the workplace stress and all that. If you want to give us a call on this, we'll be thrilled to hear from you, as always. 0845 303 3333. Quite a few texts on this subject. This one's on the subject of ageism, first of all. Hi, Martin. I think Bruce Forsyth has a point, because everybody's going around and saying, well, he's a silly old fool, has passed his sell-by date, etc. Imagine the uproar if, for instance, a female football presenter got something wrong and anyone started saying, silly woman, women don't know enough about football, etc., to do the job properly. There'd be an absolute uproar, whereas people seem quite happy saying Bruce Forsyth's a silly old fool. In fact, I think I have a tweet on that very subject here. It says, considering Brucey, this is Graham Morgan, says, considering Brucey has been past his sell-by date for at least 10 years, I don't think he can have too many complaints. So you might have your own views on Brucey, who I have to say, when he does try and do a joke, can be slightly uncomfortable on Strictly Come Dancing. We wouldn't like to say it's because he's old. It's maybe